Lasseter's Lost Reef Chapter 1 Whispers of the Past. Emily Carson arrived in Alice Springs amidst a cloud of red dust, the kind that clung to everything, the skin, clothes, even the air itself. The sun hung low on the horizon, casting long shadows over the town's sun-baked streets. As she stepped off the bus, adjusting the straps of her heavy backpack, the worn leather journal tucked inside felt like a lead weight pressing into her shoulders. It had belonged to her grandfather, a man obsessed with the legend of Lasseter's Lost Reef, a mythical vein of gold supposedly buried deep in the Australian Outback. For most, it was just another ghost story, one that had lured treasure hunters into the desert for generations, many never to return. But for Emily, a trained geologist with an insatiable thirst for discovery, it wasn't just about gold, it was about the truth. Alice Springs was a town of contradictions, dusty and rough, yet buzzing with the energy of adventurers, prospectors, and drifters who had either found fortune or were still chasing it. She checked into a small motel, its air conditioner groaning against the desert heat, and spread out her grandfather's notes on the bed. Maps, coordinates, old letters, fragments of a puzzle she had spent months trying to assemble. One name kept coming up in her research: Jack Turner. The next morning, Emily found him at a local diner, where the scent of strong coffee and fried eggs clung to the air. Jack was older than she'd expected, late 40s, maybe 50s, his face lined by years spent under the outback sun. His shirt was dusty, his boots worn, and his eyes sharp.
"You must be Emily,"
he said, his voice a deep gravel laced with amusement.
"And you're Jack Turner."
"That's what they tell me,"
he replied, sipping his coffee.
"Heard you're chasing Lasseter's ghost."
"I'm after facts, not ghosts."
Emily met his gaze.
"Facts are rare out here. The desert doesn't care about facts. It only cares about who survives it."
She pulled out her grandfather's journal and laid it on the table. Jack hesitated before flipping through the pages. His fingers traced the sketches and scribbled notes, his brow furrowing.
"You see something?"
she asked.
"I see the same wild goose chase that's claimed plenty before you. But..."
He tapped a section of the map.
"This here? This is different. Most folks fixate on old coordinates. Your grandfather was looking at geological formations patterns. If he was right..."
He trailed off, scratching his chin.
"If he was right, what?"
Emily leaned in.
"Then you might be onto something. But it won't be easy. The Outback doesn't like to give up its secrets."
Emily felt a surge of excitement.
"Will you take me?"
Jack sighed, leaning back in his chair.
"I swore I was done with lost cause treasure hunts. But something tells me you're too stubborn to turn back."
"You'd be right."
She smiled. Jack muttered, finishing his coffee.
"All right, we'll need supplies and a damn good plan."
Zess. As they left Alice Springs, the endless expanse of red dust and sun-scorched rock stretched before them. Emily's heart pounded. This wasn't just an expedition. This was her grandfather's final journey, and she was going to finish it. Chapter 2, Into the Wilderness. The outback loomed before them like an unbroken sea of red dust and raw heat. But before they could even leave Alice Springs, Emily and Jack faced an unexpected challenge: skepticism, and not the casual kind. At a local supply store, Emily placed a bundle of topo maps and survival gear on the counter, feeling the weight of the journey ahead. The shopkeeper, a wiry man in his 60s with leathery skin and piercing blue eyes, studied her with a mix of curiosity and disapproval.
"You heading out far?"
he asked, scanning the items. Emily hesitated. She had no intention of broadcasting their mission, but Jack, leaning lazily against the counter, answered for her.
"Lasseter's ghost,"
he said, smirking.
"She's got the bug."
The shopkeeper's expression darkened.
"That damn reef's gotten more people killed than I care to count. You'd do better spending your money at the casino. At least they send you home when you lose."
A murmur of agreement came from an old man sitting by the window, sipping his tea.
"Lost a mate chasing that fool's gold,"
he grumbled.
"Desert's a graveyard for dreamers."
"I'm not after gold. I'm a geologist. I'm following scientific evidence."
Emily squared her shoulders. The shopkeeper snorted.
"Scientific evidence, huh? You mean some scribbles from another dead man? You think you're the first to have a map?"
He slammed a tin of coffee onto the counter.
"I've seen blokes with military-grade gear, funding, helicopters. None of 'em found a damn thing."
The tension in the air thickened. A younger man in the corner, a wiry, sunburnt prospector, shook his head.
"And if you do find it, what then? Think the government's gonna let you waltz out with a fortune in gold? Think the Aboriginals want you digging up their land?
He leaned forward.
Think the Outback wants you to find it?
Emily felt a ripple of unease. The hostility wasn't about her personally, it was about what she represented. Jack, ever the pragmatist, cut in smoothly.
Easy there, mate. We ain't digging up squat. Just a little sightseeing trip.
The shopkeeper gave Jack a look, then turned to Emily.
You got family in Alice?
Emily shook her head.
Then no one's coming if you don't make it back.
He said bluntly. The silence that followed was heavy. Emily paid for the supplies, ignoring the feeling that every set of eyes in the store followed her as she left. Outside, she turned to Jack.
Why'd you tell them what we're doing?
Jack shrugged, tossing a bag into the truck.
You'd be surprised how much information people give up when they think you're an idiot. If any of these blokes knew something useful, they would have spilled it just to laugh at us later.
Emily frowned.
And did they?
Jack gave her a lopsided grin.
Nothing we don't already know. No one trusts the story, but they still fear it. That tells me one thing. Lasseter found something. Maybe not gold, but something real enough to keep this town spooked for a century.
Emily mulled over his words as they drove out of town. The science of discovery. By late afternoon, the town had disappeared behind them, swallowed by the vastness of the outback. The land stretched endlessly, rolling dunes, sun-cracked earth, and scrubby vegetation clinging to life in the heat. Jack drove in silence, occasionally glancing at Emily, who sat cross-legged in the passenger seat, studying her grandfather's maps and scribbling notes.
You really think rocks are going to lead us to gold?
He asked, amused.
Not gold location.
Emily didn't look up. Jack raised an eyebrow.
Look, the Outback is ancient. Millions of years older than people give it credit for. Over time, erosion, seismic activity, and water shape the landscape in predictable ways. If Lasseter's Reef is real, it's not floating around randomly. It would be locked into a specific kind of rock formation, following fault lines or certain mineral deposits.
Jack smirked.
So what you're saying, the desert left us a treasure map?
In a way, yes.
Emily said, unfazed.
Quartz reefs form in predictable patterns. If you understand those patterns, you can follow them like signposts. My grandfather wasn't just following coordinates, he was tracking geology.
Jack whistled low.
Well, damn. I just thought we were going to be out here wandering in circles till you got bored.
Emily shot him a look.
You wouldn't have come if you thought that.
Jack chuckled but didn't respond. Jack's real motivation. That night, as they made camp under the sprawling desert sky, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that Jack's reasons for coming weren't entirely honest. They sat around the fire, the embers casting flickering shadows on the sand. Jack poked at the flames with a stick, sipping from a tin mug.
You ever think about why people want Lasseter's Reef to exist?
He asked suddenly. Emily looked up.
Because people want to believe in lost treasure.
Jack smirked.
Nah. It's bigger than that. People need legends like this, something just out of reach, something to chase. Keeps them distracted from the fact that they're not finding gold in their own backyards.
Emily frowned.
That's a cynical way to look at it.
Jack shrugged.
Yeah, well, cynicism pays.
She narrowed her eyes.
Jack, why did you agree to come?
Jack hesitated just a fraction too long before answering.
Because you're paying me.
But Emily wasn't buying it. It hit her suddenly.
You benefit from the story, don't you?
Guess you got me figured.
You make money off this.
Jack sighed.
I've made a lot of money over the years running Lasseter's conspiracy theories online. Blogs, forums, even YouTube. I tell different versions, build up the mystery, keep people chasing it. Nobody wants the truth, Em. They just want a story that never ends.
Emily felt a surge of anger.
So this is just a joke to you? You're just cashing in on people's obsession?
Jack met her gaze, his expression unreadable.
Let me ask you something, Emily. What happens if we do find it? What if we prove the reef exists? You think the world's going to be happy? You think people will just accept it and move on?
She hesitated. Jack leaned forward.
The minute we find it, the legend dies, and people hate losing their legends.
Emily exhaled, unsettled. Jack smirked.
Welcome to the business of truth, kid. It's not as simple as you think.
As the fire crackled, Emily realized something. Jack Turner wasn't just her guide. He was part of the very machine that had kept Lasseter's legend alive. And now, for the first time, he had a chance to kill it. Chapter 3, The Storm's Revelation. The outback was eerily silent in the morning, the kind of quiet that pressed against Emily's ears and made the world feel unnervingly vast. The fire had died down to embers, and Jack was already moving, the packing supplies into the truck with methodical ease. Emily, still unsettled from their conversation the night before, sipped her rapidly cooling coffee and watched him.
You never answered my question.
She finally said. Jack glanced at her, throwing a rolled-up tarp into the truck bed.
Which one?
Emily continued.
Are you here for the truth, or just another story to sell?
Jack sighed, rubbing the back of his neck.
You think I'm out here spinning tales while we risk our necks in the middle of nowhere?
That's exactly what I think.
Emily shot back.
You've built an entire career off keeping this myth alive. Why would you want to solve it?
Jack didn't answer right away. He took his time, pulling out a cigarette, lighting it with a battered Zippo. He took a slow drag before finally exhaling.
Truth and stories ain't so different,
He said.
You think finding the reef is going to end the legend? It won't. Even if we find a mountain of gold, people will still argue about whether it's really Lasseter's, whether it was planted, whether we even found it at all. The truth's just another version of the myth. Only difference is, it doesn't pay as well.
Emily felt frustration bubbling inside her.
Then why did you agree to come?
Jack studied her, his smirk fading.
Because you believe in it.
He said.
Of the road.
Emily wasn't sure if that made her feel better or worse. But before she could press further, the wind picked up. The sandstorm. The first warning was a distant howl, like the low moan of an animal on the wind. Jack stiffened, turning toward the horizon. Emily followed his gaze. A wall of brown and red was rising in the distance, an ominous cloud swallowing the sky. Shit,
Jack muttered, flicking away his cigarette. We need to move, now.
Emily barely had time to grab her pack before Jack was throwing gear into the truck. His movements frantic but precise.
How bad is it?
She asked, voice raised over the rising wind. Jack didn't answer immediately. He was too busy securing the tarp over their supplies. Then finally he turned to her.
Bad enough that if we don't find cover in the next 10 minutes, we're in for a hell of a time.
The wind roared through the desert, picking up loose sand and whipping it against their skin like tiny needles. Jack slammed the truck's door shut.
We're not outrunning it.
He shouted.
Get down, cover your face.
Emily barely had time to comply before the storm hit. Buried secrets. The world disappeared into a fury of wind and sand. Emily curled into herself, scarf pulled over her face, eyes squeezed shut as the storm howled around them. It felt like an eternity before the wind finally began to ease. She opened her eyes slowly. Everything around them had changed. The landscape was unrecognizable. Dunes shifted, the ground reshaped by nature's violent hand. Jack groaned beside her, brushing sand from his face.
Well, that was fun.
Emily coughed, spitting out grit.
Speak for yourself.
Jack pushed himself up, surveying the damage.
Truck's fine,
He said.
but the sand buried half our gear. Gonna be a pain digging it out.
Emily was about to reply when something caught her eye. A shape, half buried in the sand. She frowned, brushing at the surface. The wind had exposed something, a satchel.
Jack.
She said, her voice tight. He turned, saw what she was looking at, and his expression darkened. Emily knelt, fingers trembling as she pulled it free. The leather was cracked, brittle with age, but it was still intact. She carefully unfastened the straps and peeled it open. Inside was a colonial-era pistol, its barrel rusted but still intact, and beside it, a note, the paper yellowed with time, but miraculously preserved. Emily pulled it out, her heart hammering. The handwriting was old-fashioned, elegant, and the message was chilling.
Don't believe it's not gold. It is far more valuable.
Emily's breath hitched. Jack knelt beside her, his face unreadable as he scanned the note.
Well,
He murmured,
looks like someone else found the reef before us.
and whatever they found, it wasn't what they expected. Chapter 4, The Forbidden Truth. The weight of the note pressed heavily in Emily's hands. The storm had uncovered more than just sand. It had unearthed a secret buried beneath the legend of Lasseter's Reef. Jack took the pistol, inspecting it with a practiced eye.
Late 19th, early 20th century.
He murmured.
Looks like something a British expedition would have carried.
Emily barely heard him. Her gaze was locked on the aged paper, on the message scrawled in fading ink.
Don't believe it's not gold. It is far more valuable.
Her mind spun. Who had written this? And why had it been buried in the middle of the desert, hidden away for generations? She turned the note over, searching for more clues. There at the bottom was a signature. The name was faint, barely legible beneath the wear of time. But when Emily traced the letters, her blood ran cold. Harold Lasseter, her grandfather's obsession. The man who had vanished into the outback chasing this very myth. Jack saw it too. He let out a low whistle.
Well, shit.
Emily's hands clenched the paper.
Lasseter wrote this.
Jack nodded.
Looks that way.
But why?
She whispered. Jack exhaled, running a hand through his dust-covered hair.
That's the real question, ain't it?
Emily turned to the satchel, her breath quickening. If Lasseter had written this note, then the bag had belonged to his expedition. And if he had left a warning behind. She dug deeper into the satchel, hands searching through the layers of dried fabric. And then, beneath a bundle of deteriorated cloth, her fingers brushed against something cold and smooth. She pulled it out and felt her entire world shift. It was a stone tablet, unlike anything she had ever seen before. The carvings on its surface were intricate, deliberate. This was no simple rock. This was a record. Jack peered over her shoulder, eyes widening.
The hell is that?
History.
A lost civilization. They sat in the sand, studying the tablet as the wind whispered around them. Emily traced the carvings, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. The figures depicted weren't just abstract symbols, they were people. Aboriginal people. More than that, the carvings showed buildings, permanent structures, unlike the widely accepted narrative of pre-colonial Australia. Jack frowned.
This doesn't look like nomadic living.
That's because it's not.
Emily shook her head, her pulse hammering. Her training as a geologist, her understanding of historical strata, everything told her one undeniable truth. This should not exist. For centuries, the official line had been that Australia's first peoples were nomadic, never forming settled cities or lasting infrastructure. It was part of the justification behind terra nullius, the British legal fiction that Australia was
Nobody's land.
before colonisation. But this was proof of a stable, advanced society. So, what you're saying they built cities?
Emily nodded slowly. Not just cities, a civilization. One that predates anything we've ever acknowledged.
Jack exhaled, shaking his head. But Emily wasn't finished. She turned the tablet over and felt her stomach drop. The next set of carvings told a different story. Destruction, massacre. Her hands trembled as she traced the figures. They showed men, British men, with rifles, and the people in the next scene. They weren't standing. They were lying dead.
Every single one.
Jack's voice was quiet, grim.
They wiped them out.
Emily closed her eyes, feeling a sickening wave of realization. This wasn't just proof of civilization. It was evidence of its erasure. The real Lasseter's secret. Jack broke the silence first.
So that's what Lasseter found.
Emily nodded, her throat tight. And that's why he left the note.
Jack leaned back on his elbows, staring up at the sky.
Damn. All these years, people have been chasing gold, and the real treasure was history.
Emily wasn't listening. Her mind was racing with another thought, one that sent a deep, painful crack through her faith in her grandfather. If Lasseter knew this, why didn't he tell the world? The man had spent his life chasing the reef, documenting his findings, leaving behind clues for others to follow. And yet, when he discovered something truly groundbreaking, something that should have rewritten history, he had buried it. Jack must have seen the look on her face.
What's on your mind?
Emily tightened her grip on the tablet. My grandfather knew.
She whispered.
He must have known.
Jack frowned.
You sure about that?
Emily's hands shook as she flipped through her grandfather's journal, scanning the pages for something, anything, that might suggest he had been aware of the truth. And then she found it, a single passage scrawled in the margins of an old map.
Some things are better left forgotten.
The words hit her like a gut punch. Jack read over her shoulder, his face unreadable.
Well, damn.
Emily's voice was hoarse. He covered it up.
Jack exhaled.
Maybe he thought no one would believe him.
Emily clenched her jaw. Or maybe he thought it was too dangerous to reveal.
Jack studied her.
So what do we do now?
Emily didn't answer right away. The weight of the truth pressed heavy on her. This wasn't about gold anymore. This was about justice. The real question wasn't whether they had found Lasseter's Reef. The question was who had killed to keep this story buried, and who still might. Because if they had uncovered this secret, someone else might want it buried again. And this time, they might not leave a note. Chapter 5, A Rift in the Desert. Emily sat by the fire, her hands clenched into fists as the desert stretched around them, vast and silent. The weight of the stone tablet, the note, the pistol, all of it pressed down on her like a boulder. Her grandfather knew. He had chosen to keep the truth hidden. Why? Was he afraid? Did he think no one would believe him? Or, worse, had he made peace with the lie of terra nullius? Jack sat opposite her, staring into the fire. His usual smirk was gone, replaced by something unreadable.
So,
He said after a long silence.
what's the plan?
Emily didn't hesitate. I'm making this public.
Jack barely reacted. He reached for his canteen, took a slow sip, and wiped his mouth.
That's a big decision, Em.
She narrowed her eyes. No, it's not. The big decision was when he chose to bury this instead of telling the world. I won't do the same.
Jack exhaled heavily.
You're playing with fire.
Emily's frustration boiled over. You don't get it, do you? This isn't just some lost artifact. This isn't just about a treasure hunt. This is proof that the entire history of Australia was built on a lie.
Jack finally met her gaze. His eyes were cool, measured.
Yeah,
He said slowly.
and what do you think happens when you tell people?
Emily frowned. What do you mean?
Jack leaned forward. You think the government's going to celebrate this discovery? You think the mining companies, the landowners, the people who have profited from this history are just going to roll over and say, whoops, our bad? This is bigger than you, bigger than me.
Emily shook her head. So what? We just stay quiet? Keep letting the lie stand?
Jack let out a humorless chuckle. You really think you can fight that kind of power? What happens if this story disappears, and so do you?
A cold shiver ran down Emily's spine. Jack wasn't just arguing against her, he was warning her. The choice Jack makes, Jack stretched, sighing.
Look, Em, I get it. You're young, you've got that fire in you, you want to change the world. But trust me, some stories don't get told because they can't be told.
Emily's mind snapped into focus. Jack knew, not just about the truth, he had always known.
How long? She asked quietly.
Jack raised an eyebrow. How long what?
How long have you known about this? About what Lasseter really found?
Jack hesitated, just for a second. Emily's stomach turned.
Jesus, you've made money off this for years. The mystery of Lasseter's Reef, that's your bread and butter, isn't it?
Jack shrugged, but his jaw was tight. People love a mystery. You take that away, they move on. No clicks, no books, no documentaries, no forums arguing over coordinates and lost expeditions. The truth?
He shook his head.
The truth doesn't sell.
Emily stared at him, feeling sick.
You knew, and you let me walk right into this.
Jack didn't deny it. Instead, he stood up and stretched, rolling his shoulders.
Well, he said, I think it's time we pack up and head back.
Emily stiffened. You're not taking that satchel.
Jack glanced at it, then back at her.
You think you can stop me?
Emily reached for her phone, her fingers trembling slightly as she tapped the screen. Jack's eyes followed her movements, curiosity flickering across his face. Then she turned the screen toward him. Dropbox, all files uploaded. Jack's smirk dropped. Emily's voice was calm but firm.
I already photographed everything, the tablet, the note, the pistol, and it's all uploaded.
Jack's expression darkened. You think that'll protect you?
Emily's jaw clenched. I think it means you're too late.
Jack exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair.
You're smarter than I gave you credit for.
Emily didn't flinch, and you're more of a coward than I gave you credit for.
Jack chuckled, but there was no humor in it.
You're playing a dangerous game, Em. You think the internet makes you safe? Think again.
Emily squared her shoulders. I don't care.
Jack studied her for a long moment. Then, without another word, he grabbed the satchel. Emily let him take it. Because he didn't know she had also switched the original note with a forgery. The real message, the one Lasseter had written, was tucked safely in her pocket. Jack, thinking he had erased the evidence, was walking away with a fake. Emily turned, walking in the opposite direction. They had started this journey as allies. Now, they were enemies, and Emily knew one thing for certain. This was far from over. Chapter 6, The Fight for Truth. The first headlines broke before Emily had even made it back to Alice Springs. Explorer uncovers ancient Aboriginal civilization. Jack Turner claims historic find. Her stomach twisted. Jack had moved fast. She stared at her phone, scrolling through news articles, each one attributing the discovery to Jack Turner, historian and researcher. He had even held a press conference in Alice Springs, standing in front of cameras, holding up the tablet as if it were his personal trophy. Her hands shook with rage as she watched the footage. Jack, smooth as ever, smirked at the reporters.
We were following a lead on Lasseter's Reef, but instead I uncovered something far more important. This artifact suggests a level of Aboriginal settlement and civilization previously unknown. I believe this discovery will rewrite history.
Emily nearly threw her phone at the wall. He had stolen her discovery. Worse, he had framed it as his, controlling the narrative before she even had a chance to tell the truth. And deep down, she knew why. Jack didn't care about Aboriginal history. He cared about his image, about staying relevant, about ensuring that when the world looked back on this moment, his name was the one they remembered. Emily clenched her jaw.
Not a chance, you bastard, she muttered. She was going to set the record straight. The smear campaign, the second wave of news coverage hit the next morning, and this time it was about her. Radical activist or fabricator? Who is Emily Carson? She skimmed the article, her stomach twisting. They were going after her personally. Right-wing media, led by One Nation-backed pundits, had already begun their attack. They painted her as a radical feminist, a left-wing extremist, a fraud who had no business speaking about history. Then the fabrications started. Photoshopped images, fake social media posts, tweets she had never written, interviews she had never given. One outlet even claimed she had been arrested for vandalizing a war memorial, an outright lie. But one repeated enough times that people started believing it. She wasn't just being discredited, they were erasing her credibility, ensuring that everything she said about the Aboriginal civilization would be dismissed as the ramblings of a lunatic. This wasn't just about burying history anymore, this was about destroying her. Emily fights back. She had two choices. She could roll over, let Jack, One Nation, and their media machine paint her as a fraud, or she could fight. And Emily was never one to back down. She booked herself a TV interview, a primetime slot on Australia's largest news network, going head-to-head with one of the very journalists who had spread lies about her. When the cameras rolled, she didn't hesitate. I didn't fabricate anything. Jack Turner stole my discovery, and now a group of politicians who don't like what this discovery means are trying to discredit me.
The host leaned forward.
So you're claiming that Jack Turner lied?
Emily didn't blink, not claiming, proving.
She pulled up her phone, live on air, and displayed the original Dropbox uploads, dated before Jack's so-called press conference. Every photo, every note, every piece of evidence proving she was the one who found the truth. The interviewer scrambled, trying to shift the conversation.
But some have pointed out your past.
Emily cut him off. My past isn't the story. The story is that Australia's history is built on a lie, and people like One Nation are trying to keep that lie alive. Ask yourself, why are they attacking me personally instead of discussing the discovery? Because they know they can't fight the truth, so they're trying to destroy the person telling it.
The segment went viral. Jack's name was suddenly under scrutiny. One Nation's involvement was exposed, and the backlash was swift. But Emily wasn't done. She was just getting started. Chapter 7. The Narrative War. Jack Turner wasn't the kind of man to go down without a fight. Within 24 hours of Emily's viral interview, he was everywhere. Morning talk shows, radio segments, podcasts, even a live-streamed Q&A on his social media accounts. And his message was clear.
I never said Emily didn't find the artifacts. I just presented the discovery in a way the public could understand. She's a geologist, not a historian. She doesn't grasp the full implications of what we found.
Emily gritted her teeth as she watched him smoothly twist the facts.
And let's be real, he continued, smiling for the cameras. Emily's been acting a little unstable, hasn't she? Accusing me of stealing, claiming there's some grand conspiracy? It's unfortunate, really. She's brilliant, but she's letting emotions cloud her judgment.
That one stung. He wasn't refuting her evidence. He was undermining her credibility, framing her as an emotional, irrational woman who didn't understand the big picture. And it worked. His supporters flooded social media, parroting his words.
Jack is the professional. Emily's just chasing clout. Emily's out of her depth. She should stick to rocks. Sounds like a bitter woman who lost her spotlight.
Emily slammed her laptop shut, fuming. Jack wasn't fighting the truth. He was controlling the narrative, an unexpected ally. Just when it felt like the tide was turning against her, a new voice entered the conversation. Dr. William Harris, a historian from Melbourne University, appeared on national television, and he wasn't mincing words.
Emily Carson's discovery is one of the most important in Australian history. Jack Turner's attempt to claim credit is laughable. His career is built on sensationalism, not research.
Emily sat bolt upright. Dr. Harris was respected, with decades of work on Aboriginal history, and now he was backing her. The interviewer pushed back.
But Emily's claims are controversial.
The only controversy is that people like One Nation and Jack Turner don't want this discovery to be real. Because if it is, it completely shatters the foundation of how we've justified Australia's colonial history.
Jack's name was officially toxic in academic circles. For the first time, he was on the defensive, a secret hidden in stone. Then came the game changer. Dr. Harris connected Emily with a group of Aboriginal elders from the region where the tablet had been found, and they had a story to tell. At first, they were hesitant. Too many people, academics, politicians, white men with money, had exploited their history before. But Emily wasn't just another researcher. She was fighting. So they told her the truth.
There is a cave.
One elder, Uncle Harry, told her.
Not far from where you found that stone. It has been hidden from outsiders for generations. But it holds the proof you seek.
Emily's breath caught.
Can you take me there?
She asked. Uncle Harry studied her, his dark eyes unreadable.
You are ready to listen?
Emily nodded.
Then come.
The cave that changes everything. The journey was long and brutal. Hours of hiking through searing heat, across landscapes that had swallowed explorers for centuries. And then, deep in a rock formation untouched by modern hands, they arrived. The cave entrance was narrow, hidden behind layers of rock and overgrowth. Inside it was cool and dark, the air thick with history. And then, Emily saw them. The paintings, scenes of daily life, people fishing, hunting, cooking. But then, structures, houses, permanent buildings, a civilization. She traced a trembling finger over the images.
It's real,
she whispered. And then the final carving, a massacre. Figures with rifles, standing over bodies, and beside them a symbol Emily recognized instantly. The crest of the British military. The truth that cannot be ignored. Emily turned to Uncle Harry, her voice shaking.
They knew, the British knew.
They knew, and they made sure no one else ever would.
This wasn't just evidence of an ancient civilization. This was proof of its erasure. A deliberate act of genocide, buried beneath 200 years of lies. Emily's hands curled into fists. This was the final nail in the coffin of Terra Nullius. And now there was no stopping her. Jack Turner had tried to steal the truth. One Nation had tried to bury it. But Emily Carson was about to burn them all down with it. Chapter 8. The Reckoning. Emily Carson stood at the podium, heart pounding. Cameras flashed, microphones lined up in front of her, and journalists filled the conference room. But she wasn't alone. To her right, Uncle Harry and several other Aboriginal elders stood in solemn silence. To her left, Dr. William Harris, the historian from Melbourne University. This was their moment. Emily took a deep breath.
For over 200 years, Australia's been built on a lie.
She began. She clicked a remote. Behind her, a massive screen lit up with images from the cave. Cave paintings of cities and settlements, records of an advanced, stable civilization. The final, damning image, British soldiers standing over the bodies of massacred Aboriginal people. Gasps rippled through the room. Emily didn't stop.
This is the truth they didn't want you to see. Jack Turner and the One Nation Party have spent the last week trying to bury this discovery because it doesn't fit their narrative. But history is not theirs to control.
Dr. Harris stepped forward.
This discovery is the most significant in modern Australian history. The destruction of this civilization was not a natural disaster. It was an act of genocide, covered up for generations.
A reporter raised her hand.
Miss Carson, Jack Turner claims you're fabricating these findings. How do you respond?
Emily smiled grimly.
Funny you should mention that.
She pulled out her phone and held it up.
I have proof that Jack Turner and One Nation aren't just lying. They're willing to threaten my life to protect this cover-up.
The room went silent, the threat that broke them. 2 days earlier, Emily had received a call. It was Jack.
Meet me, we need to talk. No cameras, no reporters, just you and me.
She knew it was a trap. So she came prepared, a hidden wire recorder tucked inside her jacket. Jack and 3 men from One Nation met her in a hotel parking garage, faces grim and serious.
You need to stop this. You're playing with fire, Emily.
One of the One Nation men, a politician from Queensland, stepped forward.
We have connections, girl. You think we won't bury you?
Another chimed in.
Your family's not safe. Accidents happen.
Emily had clenched her fists, but stayed calm.
You're threatening me?
Jack didn't even flinch.
I'm warning you. Walk away or you'll regret it.
Emily had smiled, because every single word was being recorded. The final blow. Emily played the recording over the speakers at the press conference. Jack's voice, the threats, the attempted intimidation. The journalists erupted. The public backlash was instant. Within hours, Jack Turner was arrested for conspiracy and making threats of violence. One nation's leadership imploded, scrambling to deny involvement. The Australian Electoral Commission launched an investigation, and within a week, One Nation was struck off as a registered political party due to corruption and criminal conduct. Emily watched it all unfold with quiet satisfaction. The truth had won, not just about the lost Aboriginal civilization, but about the people who tried to erase it. The aftermath. Jack Turner went to prison. His career, his reputation, gone. One Nation collapsed, their influence wiped from Australian politics. And Emily? She became a household name. She didn't want fame, but she wanted the truth to be remembered. Her work, alongside Aboriginal historians and elders, became the foundation for rewriting Australia's history books. Because now, the world knew the truth. And this time, no one could bury it. The end. Epilogue, 1 year later. Emily knelt before the entrance of the cave, running her fingers along the ancient paintings. Uncle Harry stood beside her.
They always tried to silence us,
He said.
but our stories never die.
Emily nodded. History had finally spoken, and this time the world had listened.